You're listening to the Lead Like No Other podcast, episode 88. On an earlier episode, I talked about doubling down on emotional intelligence and said that I was going to make a series out of them. And today is the second in that series. And we're going to talk today about self-awareness and how important that is in terms of developing a foundation for emotional intelligence. Now is the time really to double down, at least on understanding what is it in regards to emotional intelligence, because I bet you'll be surprised to find that you're probably doing a lot of the things now. You just didn't realize that that's what it was called or that was the impact of it. And this series of workshops is really going to help to uncover that based on work that I've done for over a decade now in this space with many organizations, individuals, and teams. Again, I'm Patrick V, and this is the Lead Like No Other podcast, where I'm not only obsessed with interviewing those whose actions are inspiring others to do great things, but also in uncovering the research that demonstrates that we all have the ability to lead like no other and to rise above our best. So let's get into it. So this emotional intelligence episode is about developing self-awareness. And I've been playing a lot with this idea of emotional intelligence and also, to me, flipping it around to say that this really is about being intelligently emotional. And I think that helps some people out there to maybe connect to this in a way that doesn't feel so fluffy or kumbaya-ish, even though I know it's not. It's a strong skill. Again, it's something that I've had an opportunity and the benefit of working with since 2008 formally. And if I look back on my career before that, it was really about understanding, or I would say not understanding, what emotional intelligence was formally, but certainly knowing that if I were to trace back where I was successful and unsuccessful, it would come back to when I behaved in ways that were either emotionally intelligent or emotionally unintelligent. And that's really what this episode will be. So we'll look at self-awareness. Well, what is self-awareness? Self-awareness is really just about being in touch or really having a good sense of who we are. What are the drivers? What are the triggers that we have? And really it comes down to emotions and values. And I'll start off with emotions that really, when we're dealing with emotions, they impact the decisions we make, the behaviors that we demonstrate, and our ability to perform, our level of performance. All three of those are impacted by our emotions. Well, if that's the case, then why wouldn't I want to be aware of what are those things? This episode really looks to say, how can I get better at understanding that? And this is a muscle. What's also important here to recognize is that self-awareness, just like emotional intelligence, just because you're self-aware or you know somebody that's self-aware, that's not the end game. It's a start, hopefully, but it's not the end game. Because I will tell you, in my experience, unfortunately, over the years, I have run across several individuals that I would say were very self-aware. Unfortunately, they were self-aware that they were not nice people. And they were self-aware that they were going to behave in certain ways regardless of how it impacted somebody else. And that's not the kind of self-awareness that we're aiming for here. So the first exercise that you can do in regards to really developing this level of self-awareness is to Google emotions, and you'll come up with a list. Print out that list and then go through it. And on that list, right next to each one of those behaviors, either positive, negative, or neutral. And then maybe take the top three that are positive, the top three that are negative, and maybe three that you think are neutral. From there, what we want to do, so say, as an example, if I were looking at a list that I've used before, I might have some things on there: admired, fortunate, safe, insecure, sad, frustrated, optimistic, angry, appreciated, understood, respected. On that list, I'd write down, is it positive, is it negative, or is it neutral next to each one of those? And then from there, what I want to do is, what events typically cause these? So if I look back and say, well, what events, what workplace events, what home events, whatever that might be, typically make me angry? What workplace events Or what events in general make me feel respected or frustrated? What are events that I generally get frustrated in? And then what are ones that are positive that I feel fortunate about? Whatever those are, because it's going to be important as we go through this, because what we're going to do next is take a look and say, from emotions, we're then going to tie it to values. Again, you could simply Google values and you're going to come up with a list. And I would, again, challenge you, take 3 to 5 of those that are your top values. So it might be trust, integrity, humility, competence, recognition, honesty, leadership, whatever those are. And then look to how those impact you in your own life. And what I mean by that is, again, you're really doing a connect the dots exercise here. Because what I would ask you to do is take whatever that value is and then write your own definition of that value. What does that value personally mean to you? And then again, if we're looking at this from a workplace setting, look and ask yourself or answer this question. Workplace events that result in positive emotions associated with this value are, and write those out. Next, what are workplace events that result in negative emotions associated with that value? What you're going to start to see is that there are connections here that probably happen more than we think. And it's not until we sort of take a step back and start connecting the dots, we realize that we've got triggers. Generally, they come from what our values are. So the next part of this exercise is to say, or to answer this question of saying, decisions I sometimes make when these events and emotions arise include behaviors I sometimes display to others when these events and emotions arise are, and then lastly, strategies I could implement to optimize my emotions around this value include. Now, what you're doing here is you're doing a very simple exercise of starting to connect emotions with values. And then from there, you can really start to look and say, when I do that, how do those things affect the decisions I make, the behaviors I demonstrate, and how I perform? And you'll start to see that there are triggers. This is really part of developing that self-awareness muscle, because what we're trying to do is, if I know that recognition is something important to me, and all of a sudden I start feeling angry in a conversation or frustrated, and I know that I'm in a situation where that value is being threatened, then what I can start to do is, what are some alternative approaches I can now take so that I control both my decisions and behaviors that in the past, maybe they were positive, maybe they weren't in terms of how I reacted to this. That's the whole process here in regards to first understanding self-awareness. This is our foundation. So I hope you found this helpful, and I'm looking forward to the next webinar on developing emotional intelligence that will look at emotional expression. How do we take whatever the emotions are, and how do we effectively display those to other people? That can be so important in terms of helping other people to understand who we are, and it builds a level of connection and trust, which we all need to be more effective in terms of our working and personal relationships. If you know somebody that might benefit from this episode, I'd ask you to forward it on to them. If you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead and subscribe. And it would mean the world to me if you'd leave a rating or a comment on this or any other episode that you've listened to. And until our next episode, where we'll talk about emotional self-expression, I hope you're able to do 2 things. One is lead like no other, and the other is to rise above your best. Peace.